Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming tonight. Thank you, those of you at home. Appreciate seeing your faces here and hearing you on Zoom, if you're on Zoom. And tonight we have a very special speaker. Scott Burns is going to be talking to us about terroir and wine. So we get to combine geology and wine in one talk. I think many of you know Dr. Burns. He's a professor emeritus at Portland State University. He's taught all around the world. And even though he's an engineering geology instructor and has taught courses in all sorts of different things, wine is one of his passions. And that's why we enticed him to come up here to Seattle tonight. So without further ado, Dr. Burns, welcome.
Want me to use that or no? Here. Okay.
That one will work.
All right. Sounds good. Well, thank you very much, Gail, and thank you to all of you for coming out tonight to learn a little bit about the Missoula floods and related to wine. And I couldn't find the exact PowerPoint. I had the title would be talking about the floods and the wine, but it's 99% of the PowerPoint's still the same, so it hasn't changed. It's going to be fun. How many of you like wine sometimes? So quite a few. Good. And it's fun because back in every year at Portland State, I always taught a class in okay. Okay, you gotta let some more people in. So I always taught a soils class and a graduate level soils class at Portland State. And in 1992, all the grad students had to do a field project. And I had a student who said, I want to do a project in soils of all the vineyards in the Willamette Valley. I said, that's wonderful. I said, I don't know anything about them. What we found is nobody knew their soil. Nobody knew anything about the soils. And her name was Dion Starpiece. And then what happened is that project obviously got an A+ in the class, but then it developed into a master's thesis for her. And then with that, we completely changed the whole wine industry in the Willamette Valley based on the soils that you have got. And so we'll come back to the soils. They are not the do-all and end-all for the flavors. So many different things affect that, but they do play a very important part, especially in the western half of Washington and the Willamette Valley that you have got. And so what I'd like to do is, let's see, how do I click? Does that work? That doesn't work.
There, we're doing it.
Yeah, okay. We'll come back. So you click the right one then? Right hand.
Just pull the wheel.
Pull the wheel. So you always have to give your credentials at the beginning. And so I started teaching in 1970, full-time at the college level in Switzerland. I taught for 5 years at a place called the American College of Switzerland. This was in the wine-producing area of Switzerland, and I also taught biology in addition to geology. And what happened was I realized that I could combine chemistry and biology and geology by making wine in the lab. And so I did every year. Well, I started by year 3, 4, and 5 there. I made wine in the lab. We would take the students down to the valley bottom. Chasselas was the grape there. And there's a white wine. And so we come back, do primary fermentation, secondary fermentation. And then at Christmas time, because the white wine is clarified, they put it in the bottle, they drew their own labels, they cork it up, and in the early 70s, you could take wine on the plates. And they could take that home and give it to their parents and show them the $3,000 that their parents were paying for tuition, room, board, books was well worth it. And was any of the wine good? No. But the students all learned about wine, and as a result, we had fun. And so here is a picture of me, the young professor, Back in 1973, the yearbook at the college dedicated the yearbook to me. And these are some of the bottles in the front. I had a little handlebar mustache in those days. And so that was my first publication. You know, professors have always got to have publications. And so if you read the Journal of College Science Teaching in 1975, Science Can Be Fun and Tasty, Winemaking in the Lab, that was me. So we've had major changes in the United States in drinking habits over the years. And as you can see here, back in 1982, they did ask over 100,000 people coast to coast. You know, what is your favorite beverage, alcoholic beverage that you like to have? 49%. Is there any way we can, it's too much light here for the main screen.
Well, we can see about that. One thing that might happen is your camera will be too dark.
Okay, well, then we'll leave it on. Can you guys see the screen then? Okay, we'll do that. But back in the 80s, hardly anybody would drink wine. Nobody would, when you went to a social thing, it was always hard liquor, bourbon, scotch, and bourbon and seven, things like that, or beer. And here in the Pacific Northwest, beer is a big deal. But over the last 50 years, it has changed. Now, every state in the United States has a winery. And people love going out on the weekends to the wineries and just spending the weekend just visiting 2 or 3 vineyards and things like that. And so it has, as you can see, a major change has occurred, and wine has taken a much bigger point as a result of that. Now, every wine is going to be different from the next bottle and the next bottle based on what you can see up here. First of all, the grapes. And the Cabernet Sauvignon is going to be different from a Pinot Noir, different from a Chardonnay, different from a Pinot Gris. But then also, with the Pinot Noirs, we look at the clones, and there are different clones that you have got as a result of those too. But other things, the different flavors and the chemistry that goes into the grapes is going to be coming out of the soil. So the soils are going to be giving the different flavors is one thing that we have found out, and especially in your white wines and your thin-skinned red grapes like Pinot Noir. Once you get into the Cabernets and all of the other big heavy reds, the soil doesn't matter as much, but the geology has it in the whites and in the Pinot Noir. Climate is very important. We're in the Pacific Northwest. You know, when do we invite our friends to come and visit us? It's not in the wintertime, well, except this week it's been pretty good. But you do it generally in July, August, and September when it doesn't rain here. And that's very important for growing really, really good grapes because you don't want to have any rain at the end of the season when you've got. So climate is very, very important. Also, you need to have enough silt and clay in the soil in order to hold the water. Now, in the Willamette Valley, we don't irrigate. And so you've got to have enough water in the soils for the plants to survive at the end of the season. Now, in Eastern Washington, everything's irrigated. And so and I'll come back to that coming up later on. And then physiography, you want to have all of your vineyards facing to the south to maximize the amount of heat that you have got. And once you get above 1,500 feet, something like that, in the Willamette Valley, it's too cold. Also, in Eastern Washington, there's a certain elevation above which the grapes do not ripen at the end. So all of those things affect the soil biota. And the soil biota give the flavors that you have to the wines. And so that is what we call terroir. And that's in the title. It's a good French term that means taste of the place. And we're now seeing that word being used over and over and over of terroir of milk, terroir of cheese, terroir of yogurt, and everything like that, because it's the taste of the region that you have got. Now, there are 2 other factors that can affect the flavors of the wine. One is, and a huge one, is the winemaker. Winemaker, are you going to put it on oak or not? If you do oak, is it going to be Hungarian oak, or is it going to be French oak or American oak? What type of yeast do you use? Do you use malolactic fermentation, things like that? And then the vineyard management. Do the rows go north and south? Do they go east and west? One thing that we have been trying to do is get them not to plow in between the grapes. and just mow the grasses there. Why? Because every time you plow, you destroy all of the bugs and all the worms and things like that in the soils, and you don't have as healthy a soil. And so all of those factors will lead to different flavors that you have got in the wine. So there's terroir. Terroir is the total elements of the vineyard. It's the bedrock geology. It's the soils that you've got, the drainage, color, and age. For us in the Willamette Valley, the redder the soil, the better the soil. Red soil means well drained, which you really want. And secondly is old. Soils get older with time, redder with time. And so the older the soil, the less nutrients. And you say, wait a second, you know, in my garden, I want to fertilize and things like that. Growing grapes is exactly the opposite. You want to stress the grapes to the nth degree. And so that poor little grape will say, you know, it comes back to life in the spring, says, what is my raison d'etre? What is my reason of being? Well, it's to produce that grape for the making of the wine. And if life is hard, if there isn't a lot of water, or the soils are really bad, he puts all the grape, all the nutrients into that grape, and the winemaker is very happy at the end. And that's what you want to do. Stress the grapes. You don't want to have nutrient-rich soils. Otherwise, you'll have leaves and stems and leaves and stems and no grapes in the end. And so, as I mentioned before, it's best expressed in your Pinot Noir. Your Riesling. Washington is very, very famous for the Rieslings and Chardonnays. And then, as I said, and my microphone, well, it's still there. Okay, coffee, hops, maple syrup, cheese. I gave a talk a few years ago at one of the 4 wineries in Vermont, and everybody there was saying, "Oh shoot, all Joe's maple syrup down here is completely different from Fred's, different from Craig's down here, and it's the terroir of the area that you have got." So Dick Erath, one of the fathers of winemaking in Oregon, had a great quote: 80% of the quality of the wine comes from the vineyard and 20% comes from the winery. He's a terroirist. He is saying that really the most important thing is naturally the soils, the grapes, the climate, and things like that are important. Now, where do we grow grapes in the world? Here is a map of the world, and you can see the world in the background, but the majority of the vineyards for Vitis vinifera, which are the grapes that, you know, Cabs, Merlots, and Syrahs that we are used to, are 30 degrees north latitude and 30 degrees south latitude. Once you get above that, it's too cold, and if you get south of there, it's too warm. And so we happen to be in that zone. The United States here, Europe is, and you look over on the right-hand side, and you see China. Maybe some of you have been to China and had the Great Wall Cabernet. Unbelievably beautiful bottles. The labels are great. The winery is great. Is the wine any good? No. But they also are in a grape growing area there. And then South America, everybody knows about Chile and Argentina and South Africa, New Zealand, and Australia. So those are the grapes that we're going to be dealing with. Let's go back to France. And in France, you have got your major grape growing areas. And so you can see on the right-hand side, Burgundy. That is basically the Willamette Valley. So the Willamette Valley is the Burgundy of North America. The Rhone Valley down south, that is eastern Washington, and the Bordeaux area with the heavy reds that you have got. And so it's all climate related that we have got here. But in France, all the labels will tell you the name of the vineyard, the wine of the vineyard, the region that it has, the amount of alcohol, but they never tell you the grape. You're supposed to understand if it's red and it is from the Rhone Valley, you know it's going to be primarily a Syrah. If it is a red and it is primarily down south in Bordeaux, you know it's always going to be a mix of Cab, Merlot, and Syrah. And so you're supposed to know the region and what type of grape is going to be in that. Whereas here in the United States, we always want to know what it is. But the Willamette Valley is the Burgundy of North America. Here is Burgundy in France. And it is primarily limestone. Well, in the Willamette Valley, you don't have any limestone, but we do have a little bit of limestone down in southern Oregon, but not much here. but the climate is very, very similar. And so geologists went to Burgundy. And for years and years, there was always a line, as you can see here, between the Premier Cru and the Grand Cru up at the top. The upper vineyards were always the best. Didn't matter who the winemaker was or the owners of the different things. Above that line was always the best. The next one down, and then if you went further on down, they got more mediocre. And the common wines that you can see up here, Premier Cru, and then the Grand Cru up above. And so in Burgundy and in Bordeaux, they rank the grapes that you have got based on that. Well, geologists went in and said, that's geological. And the upper part in Burgundy is primarily marl, which is a type of limestone that is dirty. Whereas once you get down a little bit further, then you are into more pure limestone. And then down at the very bottom, that's alluvium that you have got. So the geology affects the flavor of the wines in those particular areas that you have got. And so all of the grapes that we drink, Vitis vinifera, there are over 4,000 varieties. And you can see the names that I've listed up here, all the names that you know of all of the wines that are there, and they grow in these particular areas. Now, probably the world's greatest wine climatologist is in Oregon. Greg Jones is his name. He used to be a professor at Linfield College in Southern Oregon University. Now he runs his family's vineyard Abasella, which is my favorite winery in Southern Oregon. But every year he goes to the International Terroir Conference, which I go to about every 4 years, and he gives the status of the climate of the world and what's happening. And what he has done, he's said there are 4 major grape growing areas in the world. There's cool climate, intermediate warm, warm, and hot. And so he has different average temperatures there, but what are some examples of the cool climate? Well, the Willamette Valley is one of the examples that is there, and Western Washington, Vancouver, and all the way up to Seattle, and then the Okanagan Valley. Those are cool climate, as is the Rhine Valley and the Swiss area, Loire Valley, and places like that. Intermediate warm, that's Southern Oregon. That's also Central Washington and Bordeaux in France, and that you have got in Chile. Then how about warm areas? Well, that's going to be Margaret River and Chianti in Australia, Chianti in Italy, Barolo, Portugal is a good example there, Rhone Valley, places like that. And then what are your really hot areas? Well, that is, I always think of Lodi, California, as you can see down at the very, very bottom. Also Southern Portugal and Hunter Valley in Australia. And so if you want to grow grapes, if you want to quit your job, what you do is say, what climate do I have? And then you say, where is my average temperature that is here? And then based on that, Greg put together, you can see at the top, cool, intermediate, warm, warm, and hot. He has the list of all of the grapes that you would grow in that particular area. So if you're in cool climate, what do? Your traditional German style, Müller, Thurgau, Gewürztraminer, Pinot Gris, Rieslings, and those, and Pinot Noir, and Chardonnay. And so the early winemakers that came to Oregon in the Willamette Valley, they said, well, the climate is the cool climate. So those are the grapes that you're going to be growing in those particular areas. And then the people that came to Eastern Washington, they say, whoa, we're over in the warm area and the intermediate warm. And so we get into heavy reds. And so wherever you are in the world, you have to say, what's your climate? And then you ask, what are the grapes that are going to be growing in those particular areas? And you have to match them up. It's interesting. Greg has an article about the Napa Valley. He said within 20 years, it's going to be so hot down there that they are only going to be growing Zinfandel. I mean, there is no place. They're already over on the right-hand side down there, and they have no other place to go. And so Zinfandel is going to be the major thing there. How about for the Willamette Valley and Western Washington? We have a long way to go. And we now are planting Syrah and little Tempranillo at the lower elevations, and they're all ripening. As the climate is warming up, we just shift into the next column of the grapes. And so we will always be able to make lots of wine here in the western half of Oregon and Washington. The east is eventually it's going to get a little, it's all going to be, as it gets warmer and warmer, they're going to be over into the Zinfandels that you've got over there. So the, and so what are the best transparent grapes that you have got to terroir? That is, you can taste the differences based on the soils. And so it's Riesling, Chardonnays, and Pinot Noir, the thin-skinned red grape. That is what one of the things I'm going to be talking about tonight. Now, again, if you wanted to have a vineyard, what do you have to do? You have to have at least 180 days of frost-free temperature. Eastern Washington is right at the edge of that. Now this winter, it's been very, very warm, so it's not been a problem. But we've had some very, very difficult cold winters, and a lot of the vines have frozen out. But again, you don't want to have too many mineral nutrients, because too many, you'll grow leaves and stems and not stress the grapes. You need well-drained soils. And your maximum slopes, you really want 7 to 8 degrees and facing south here in the northern part. And you don't want the really cold temperatures. So those are some of the things you really need to have. You also need to have these chemical elements up there, and I can take you back to using your high school chemistry classes that you took, and you've got carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, sulfur, calcium, magnesium, potassium, and chlorine up there at the very, very top. And then some micronutrients and some of those. And I had a PhD student who did a PhD in the terroir of wine. And you needed certain soils had more of these micronutrients, which led to some of the flavors that they had there. So we've learned a lot from that. A good friend of mine, Terry Wright, a geology professor down at Sonoma State, did a classic terroir tasting at the Iron Horse Vineyards. This is Pinot Noir grapes. He did this back in 2001, and he had Vineyard A and Vineyard B. They were very, very close by, but they had two different soils. Vineyard A had 42% clay in it. And the flavors came out deep cherry color, deep berry, and cherry cola flavors and stuff like that. Vineyard B, only 20% clay. And this was all done blind tasting. And you could see softer tannins, bigger nose. And they asked the people who were tasting, which one do you prefer? Almost everybody said Vineyard B. The same winemaker, same year, same vineyard techniques, everything was same variants that you have in the plants. The only difference was the soil. That's terroir tasting. And here we have a very sophisticated wine tasting group here in the Pacific Northwest. People want to know, why is the flavor here this different from this one, from this one? Well, soils happen to be, and the geology happen to be one of the things that are there. Down in Argentina, I got a chance to go down there and some of the wines that they produce down in that area, incredible. And they're all on off in the distance, you can see Aconcagua, the very, very large volcano there, but they're all alluvial fans that are there. And the alluvial fans coming off of the Andes that you have got there. And you have terraces. And the highest terraces are going to be the oldest ones, and the lowest terraces are going to be the youngest. The oldest ones have caliche in the soils, and it's showing that because it's dry climate. And those produce the best wines, the best flavors. The youngest terraces produce the average wines. And so it's geologically related between the ages of the soils and the quality of the wines that you have in that particular area there. Over in Australia, where many of the soils are red, red, red. Well, why are they red? Because they're old, they're well drained. And they're also low nutrient soils. But the Australians have been producing absolutely great red wines for a long period of time. So let's come back here to the Pacific Northwest and deal a little bit with the Missoula flood sediments and the Willamette Valley. Oregon's great wine that we have is Pinot Noir. And David Lett was the first guy, one of three winemakers back in the 1970s who came to Oregon, and they read their little charts and they say, what type of red wines can you grow here? Pinot Noir, and then white Chardonnays and the German styles. And so he started growing Pinot Noirs, and in 1975, he took it to the International Pinot Noir competition in France. And now he didn't win, but he took second or third place. And the French were saying, qu'est-ce que c'est? Où est Oregon? What is going on here? Where is this Oregon? And he put the Pacific Northwest on the map by taking wines that were really, really good from here. And so in Oregon, the very first planting that we had, and this was all in the Willamette Valley primarily, was 1961. But you can see now we're over 1,000 wineries and over 1,400 vineyards. Why do we have more vineyards than wineries? Because there are some people that are just farmers. They sell their grapes to wineries that don't have any vineyards. In Portland, we have 40 wineries in downtown Portland. My favorite, Hip Chicks Do Wine. And these gals are incredible. And they've been making wine for 20 years and unbelievably good ones. And so, but in Oregon, we are 70% red wines, 30% white wines. And in Washington, it's more like 80% red and 20% white that you've got here. And so put us all on the climate. So in the Willamette Valley, they're cool climate grapes. Over here in eastern Washington, and also Clark County and the whole area going up through Seattle, all cool climate grapes on this side of the Cascades. On the other side of the Cascades, they're primarily into the Cabs, Merlots, and the heavier reds that you have got. Number of wineries in the United States. Everybody knows about all the wineries that are in California, but Washington is number 2 that you have got. You know, these figures are a few years old, but the numbers haven't changed. Oregon's number 3. New York is number 4. And you say New York? Well, it's Manischewitz and Ripple are the 2 major ones, which are not the highest quality that you have got, but they are out there. And look at number 5, Texas. It used to be. I still remember tasting down there 15 years ago. And the wineries are absolutely beautiful. Texas got a lot of money, and the vineyards are really, really beautiful. Was that wine any good? No, it was crappy. But they have upgraded everything, and now some of the big heavy reds that are coming out of the Llano Estacado, the high region, and then down south, they're producing some pretty good ones that you got down in that particular area there. Wine production in the United States. California is number 1, but look at New York has moved by Oregon and Washington at number 5. And I remember I said it's because they have Ripple and Manischewitz are the 2 large volume ones, not quality that they have got, but they have quantity that are out there. But Washington is way up there, and Oregon is way, way down from there. And the impact on the economies of our states, look at the amount of money that it's got, and it's growing more and more and more. And so our states are putting a lot of money into that because there are lots of jobs and bringing a lot of people in that you've got. And so it's interesting, in 2017, I've got 2021, I've got some numbers. We had 7 wines in the top 100. This past year, Oregon had 5 top wines for the world in the and Washington had 8. Now, it's interesting. There is a new wine area that's on the border between Oregon and Washington, and it's just south of Milton Freewater. Over there. It's called the Rocks of Milton Freewater. Christophe Baron was a Frenchman who was going over to that area, and he wanted to buy some wine property. And so he started in the northern part of that area in Washington, and it was $20,000 an acre, $18,000, $19,000, blah, blah, blah. And then they crossed the border into Oregon. But as he crossed the border, he said, there's this property right on the border here that's for sale. And the real estate agent, oh, you don't want that. It's just all rocky soil. And it's a ephemeral stream that runs right down between the 2 states defining this area. It's right outside of Milton Freewater. He said, let's go look at that. And so he did, and he started digging a couple soil pits. And it was, instead of being like $25,000 an acre, it was like $3,000 an acre. He said, I'll buy this. And they said, you're crazy. I mean, it doesn't have great soil. It's just rocky soil. Well, he knew his soils from France because in Bordeaux, the best vineyards that you've got in Bordeaux are reclaimed land along the river, and it's all gravel, so there's hardly any silt and sand in the soils. And what happens is the roots go down very, very deep, and it stresses the grapes, and it produces great wines. And so Christophe, Cayuse is winery, by the way. And since he opened up, I doubt if he has had below a 93 or 94 rating, of a 100-point scale. And to get over 90 is great. He just year after year after year wins with all of his wines. Now he's expanded out to other places over there. But what happened after all of his success in this area, that whole area is now all vineyards. They just sold out. And it's the Rocks of Milton Free Water. And that's the AVA, American Viticultural Association. It's half in Washington, half in Oregon. Some of the hottest property in North America. Again, understanding the soils and stuff like that was very, very important. And our two states have done very well. Here is what a Pinot Noir grape looks like. That's Oregon's #1 grape that you have got. And in each of our states, we have AVAs. That is regions that are defined by the terroir, the geology, the climate, and what can be grown in those areas. #1, you see up here, that's the Willamette Valley. Now it's been subdivided. There are now 7 subdivisions that you have got in there based on the geology, volcanic soils, marine sediment soils, etc. And then you go down south, all the way down to southern Oregon, over to eastern Oregon, along the river, and then up the Columbia Gorge. And in Washington, you've got even more AVAs. Oregon's up to 19 now, and then I think Washington has got something like 25 AVAs that you have got, all defined on the climate, the soils, and the terroir of each one of those wine regions that you have got. So in Oregon, what we did is, with Dion Starpiece, this was from her thesis, we looked at all of the soils in the Willamette Valley, the northern Willamette Valley. And on the left-hand side, those are soil series names. Those are given by the Soil Conservation Service, now called the Natural Resource Conservation Service. Second, in parentheses, is the geology. And then the third name is a name, soil science term. And you don't need to know that, but ultisol and alphasol mean old soils. They're red. That you have got mollisol, as you can see down in the Amhill one. It's got a very thick A horizon that you have got, and then inceptisol, if you saw them halfway down, it's got a very thin A and a thin B horizon. So all of these are different. Those are the acres that you got. But you had 3 soils that were the dominant soils in the Willamette Valley. The Jory, which was all on basalt, Columbia River basalt. And so eastern Washington is all on Columbia River basalt that you've got. But then you have Missoula flood sediments on top of all of that. Willackenzie soil is uplifted marine sediments of the Coast Range that you have got. And those are mostly alphasols. Ultisols are more weather. And then the Laurelwood soil, which is found on Laurelwood Mountain, just south of the Tualatin Valley, so southwest of Portland. A huge number of acres that you have got up there. It's a basalt soil, but then you have windblown silt, loess, that is blown up there, and it's weathered into these little, look like beaties. They call it shot soil. And they're pisollites. And they are all different. And then you can see the number 5 one down there, Woodburn soil. Those are Missoula flood sediments. And you'll notice that very few acres that you have got in the Missoula flood sediments. Why? Because Missoula flood sediments are too rich. They have too much calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium, and phosphorus. They grow leaves and stems and leaves and stems, and they never stress the grapes. And so this is something that we learned early in the game is a lot of the people say, oh, this gorgeous soil that we have in the Willamette Valley. We thank Washington and Oregon because it was all eroded away by the Missoula floods and transported down to the Willamette Valley. And we have these incredibly rich valley soils for growing hazelnuts is our number one thing that we are growing, but then also grasses and everything else. But it's not good for grapes. You got to be above it. The redder the soil, the better the soil. And that's why you've got the Laurelwood, the Willackenzie, and the Jory as being the three major soils that are there. And I'm going to come back to Eastern Washington in just a second, because the soils over in the eastern part of the state, see, in Oregon, we don't irrigate. We don't irrigate any of the soils. And so therefore, you need something that is going to stress the grapes, and it's the soil. And so these three soils stress it. Eastern Washington, you have mostly Missoula flood sediments. And how do you control the stress? Irrigation. It's too hot over there to grow the grapes. And so therefore you irrigate, you give it just enough water to keep the plant alive. And therefore you'll have a great grape. So here in the Pacific Northwest, you have the Juan de Fuca plate off of the coast, creating the plates that go underneath us, uplifting the coast range. That coast range is all uplifted marine sediments that you have got. And then you have the Missoula floods that came down. So the great debate in the Willamette Valley is which soil produces the best grape flavors? Is it the Jory, which is on the basalt bedrocks, which are surrounding the Willamette Valley? Or is it the Willackenzie soil, which is on the west hand side, uplifted marine sediments? Or is it the Laurelwood soil, which is on this Laurelwood mountain with all these pisolites? It's all volcanic soil, but then you've got these pisolites that are in it. And so being on Star Piece's thesis led me to giving all these talks in the mid-90s. Everybody changed in Oregon how they made their wine, because they all of the vineyards up and down the Willamette Valley, they would every time you had a different clone or a different soil, you would have a different picking area in your, and you would take those grapes and put it into different barrels. You would ferment them, and then you would taste all of them. And in the early through the mid-90s, what you would do is, these are the A+ ones, these are the A ones, these are the Bs, the C barrels that you have got. And then you would mix all your A barrels together, and that would be your primo wine. And then you would have your B barrels, and then you sell your C barrels. And that's how they did everything. But then they said, wait a second, we have certain vineyards that year after year are always A+. And so they said, we should have single vineyards, and let's put our vineyard name on the wine. And then I got very excited because Ken Wright, who was winemaker of the world, he has a winery in Yamhill in the Willamette Valley. He actually started putting a soil series on the back. And I eventually met him. I said, Ken, you are my hero because you're putting the soil on the back. And that's the reason for the terroir. And he said, Burns, you're my hero because you are the guy that put together the story of the Willamette Valley. And so now maybe 50% of all of the Oregon wines, and now in Washington, they put their soil series on the back because it means different flavors that are going to be associated with those particular areas that you have got. If you got the Woodburn soil you see down at the bottom, Missoula flood sediments, you don't put it on there because it means it's a flat, flabby wine and not very exciting. And so there. So here are the volcanic hills of the Dundee Hills in the Willamette Valley, red soils from the volcanic soils that have eroded and developed in those particular areas. There is the Jory soil. It is our state soil. I can't remember what the state soil is of Washington, but back in the mid-90s, I was president of the Oregon Soil Science Society. Soil Science Society of America said, we need to have a state soil in every one of the states in the United States. Why do we have a state anything? Why do we have a state tree, a state rock, a state song, a state Washington and Oregon? All states have state things. Reason every kid in 4th grade gets the Oregon Blue Book, the Washington Blue Book from the Secretary of State. saying, why is your state special? And you have a state rock, a state bird, a state tree, and you learn those things. And they said, we need to have a state soil to highlight agriculture in every state. And back in 1990, the Soil Science Society in America, there are 5 state soils. Antigo Silt Loam was the very first one in Wisconsin. And so they asked all the state soil science societies to have a state soil. And so I was president, and it had to have high acreage, number one, and number two, it had to be distinctive. Well, the number one soil in Oregon was blah. It was a Missoula flood soil in the Willamette Valley. The Woodburn, I said, it's ugly. It's just tan. But the reddest soil in the state is what you see here. It's the Jory soil, and it was number 6 in acreage. And so we said, let's do this one. So we went to the legislature, and in Washington, they did the same thing. Oregon, you got to go to the House, and then you got to get in the committee, and then you got to get out of the committee to the floor, get past the House, then you go to the Senate, and you get committee. And well, I couldn't get out of committee in the House because it's just like Washington. You have a divide between the east side of the state and the west side of the state politically. In Oregon, the guys in the east would not vote for my soil because it was only on the west side around the Willamette Valley. Burns, we're not going to vote for your soil because it's only on the west side. Then I'm a geologist. Where is all this soil developed? On Columbia River basalt. Where did that lava come out of the ground? In eastern Oregon and Washington, where the 3 states come together, all those lava flows came down the Columbia River and then flowed down into the Willamette Valley and solidified and cooled in the Willamette Valley. And so I took it the next year to the committee. I said, this is the bill that will unite the east side to the west side, because the lava for all of this rock came out on the east side and then solidified on the west side. And he said, yay! And it passed both houses. And I think I still have a picture of that. There it is. My bill got through. It took me 8 years to get it through the dang legislature. But we now have a state soil. And so every kid in 4th grade, when they get his or her Oregon Blue Book, why you find out what the state soil is and all of that. Here's a picture of the Willackenzie soil, the 2nd most common vineyard soil. I got a wine bottle in the picture for side, and that's at the Elk Cove Winery. And then these are these little pisolites that make the Laurelwood soil. These are iron magnesium concretions that you have got, the silica that you have got. And so people always ask me, what's the difference in flavor between the soils that are developed on the basalt bedrocks, the Jory, and the marine sediments? In the old days, you could pour the 2 of them, and I could always tell the volcanic was light red, and the marine sediments were dark red. Well, now judging of wines, of red wines, the darker the color, the higher the number. And so all of our Pinot Noir red wines on basalt soils in the Willamette Valley have gotten darker and darker because you can put 5% of another grape, and generally it's a Syrah, and still call it Pinot Noir. And so all of them have gotten darker. So the color you can't, but the flavors haven't changed. It's mostly red currants, red plums, red cherries for the basalt soils, whereas the marine sediments are going to be more blackberries, black cherries, and stuff like that. Now, Ken Wright, who was winemaker of the world, said, Burns, what do you know about flavors of wine? Geologists drink wines out of a box, and we drink wines out of a bottle. And the basalt are fruit-driven flavors. Marine sediments are more floral, spice, lavender, cola, tobacco, cedar, and heath. The geologists don't even know the names of most of those things there. But those are those differences. But I love Adam Campbell, who is the head winemaker at Elk Cove, and they actually sell soils, same winemaker, same vineyard manager, and same year from marine sediment, Laurelwood soils, and volcanic soils. And it's called the Soil Trilogy. And he says my marine sediment soils are more black, cherry, and silk. The Laurelwood is more blue fruit and earthy, and then volcanic are more red. Pie, cherries, and spices. And I like that definition. The thing is, the flavors go back to the geology. And it's exciting to see that, and it's come through. And so I wish I could take you to Southern Oregon, which is has completely different climate down there and different river terraces and geology and marine sediments and stuff like that. And it's warmer, so you get some very, very exciting places there. Up in the Columbia Valley, I love going from Hood River up to the Dalles. They say from Burgundy to Bordeaux in 20 miles. You have Underwood Mountain, which is cool climate, and then you go all the way up to the Dalles, and it's warm climate. And so it just 20 miles. So the wine tasting in the Columbia Gorge is incredible. And then you go out to southeastern Washington. Oh my God, Mecca for just great wine tasting out there. And those are all heavy reds out in that area, the Walla Walla area. And so it has completely changed both of our states. So kind of in summary, what are the differences in the Pacific Northwest and the terroir? In Washington, 95% of the vineyards are grown on Missoula flood sediments. 95%. So how do they control the stress and everything? Drip irrigation. That is how they stress the grapes. Whereas in Oregon, 90% of the vineyards, especially in the Willamette Valley, are not irrigated, and so they use sediments and the soils to control the vigor that you have got in those particular areas there too. Now, I look around this room and I see people who are my age. And at the Enology and Viticulture program down at Oregon State University, they developed a new grape. And this is very exciting. You know, we've been dealing with Pinot Blanc, Pinot Noir, Pinot Gris, et cetera. This new hybrid grape is expected to reduce the number of trips that older people have to make to the bathroom every night. And this new wine is going to be marketed as Pinot Noir. So be sure to go down to your wine merchant and say, hey, do you have any more of the Pinot Noir? Once it comes in, it's going to sell off of the shelves, I can guarantee you, but it'll be from here. Now, if you fell asleep at the beginning and you didn't get it, wake that person next to you up. And what did I talk about? So the importance of terroir. And there are 8 factors of them most of them are geology and soils. The 2 other major ones are winemaker and the vineyard manager that you have got. In the Willamette Valley in Oregon, we control vigor by old soils because we don't irrigate. Whereas Southern Oregon and Eastern Washington, they control the vigor by irrigation and giving just enough water that is there. I'm also going to throw in another thing that is really affecting us here in the Pacific Northwest, and that is fire. We're getting more and more fires every summer. The smoke, when the smoke gets onto the grapes, you can't get it off. It is destroyed. That grape is destroyed. Now, a winemaker down in the Hood River area, a few years ago, his whole crop was completely destroyed by the fires in the gorge. And he actually made 2 barrels of his Pinot Noir, and he called it Calamity. And when I do tastings, I always have a bottle of his Calamity and let people taste it. And everybody right across the board said, boy, this would go great with barbecue because of the smell of the smoke. But for wine tasting, it's not very good. Willamette Valley, you have primarily cool climate grapes that I talked about, the Pinots, the German styles, and stuff like that. And you keep off the Missoula flood sediments. Why? Because they're just too nutrient rich. Whereas in Eastern Washington, it's a warmer climate. You control the vigor primarily through water that you've got. And so with that, I christen all of you terroirists. Go forth to all of the vineyards that are out there in the wine tasting rooms. And when you go into there, be sure to ask them, what's the soil? What is the clone? What is the year that you have got there? Thanks a lot for coming out tonight. So do we have any questions? Well, it's imminent any day. The question was, where do we get the Pinot Noir?
Old soil red.
Oh, I love it. So the question was, why is old soil red? With age, when you have bedrock that is exposed at the surface, and we have a lot of basalt here in the Pacific Northwest, in it there's a lot of iron, magnesium, potassium, sodium, phosphorus, etc. What happens is it oxidizes. And so what will happen is that rock will break down into smaller particles. And so you'll get gravels becoming sand and silt and clay. But then it'll also be oxidized. And as with all that iron in there, you oxidize that iron, it becomes Fe2O3, which is red in color. And so soils get redder and redder with age. And so whenever I dig a soil pit and I look for that red zone. That's called the B horizon. And the more red it is, the older it is. It takes more time for that. And so, and then also in the eastern part of the state, we'll get white layers down below. And those white layers are caliche layers. That is calcium carbonate that is leached down and then deposited at lower levels. And the older the soil will have more and more caliche that is down there. And so I have another talk that I could give on the older Missoula flood sediments. And it's all the story of the caliche that we find in eastern Washington that we've got there. So why does the soil get redder? It gets redder with age. Yeah.
That's true for limestone as for the salt?
Yes, limestone does it's going to have, you're going to have some iron that is going to be blown in the loess and the silt because limestone is calcium carbonate, and those end up just being brown in color. But around here we have all of the basalt soils, and we have lots of iron, and so it gets red with age. Good question. Yes.
By going from Chelan north up into Penticton and Kelowna, what are the soils to that area? What's the classification?
And so if you are going north up into Penticton and up into the Okanagan area, what you've got up there, first of all, the climate is changing and you're getting into cool climate. The Okanagan is a major wine growing area up there. And I love going up there, but it's mostly going to be just like the Willamette Valley. It's going to be the German style wines, Gewürztraminer, Müller, Thurgau, and Riesling, and then Pinot Noir, Pinot Gris, and Chardonnay. Those are the major ones that are up there. Don't have enough heat units to grow the Cabs, Merlots, and Syrah. And so as you go north in Washington, you get cooler climate, and you go on that chart I told you to the left-hand side.
Soil.
Glacial deposits mostly, and you got great, and they're great soils for growing grapes, and because they're glacial deposits and they are well aerated, and they're not compacted and like that. Their problem up there are forest fires.
Are there irrigation important there?
In some areas they do have to irrigate, but it depends upon where you are in the Okanagan. They get enough rainfall during the summertime to keep things going. Yeah, but they're producing some great Rieslings and Chardonnays up there right now. Yeah, good. Anything else that anybody has? Yes.
The older soils are on the top. So when I'm thinking that normally when you think geology, the younger things are on the top. So
Well, the older soils are not always on the top. It just depends upon where you are that you have got. Now in eastern Washington, where you have the Missoula floods, the older Missoula floods got very, very high, and some of those older ones are at the highest area up there. Just the remnants. The later Missoula floods did not destroy all of those, and they tend to be at the top, but they don't necessarily have to be. Yeah, good point. Good. Yes.
Is there any hope of growing good grapes on the Osceola mudflow in the Enumclaw Plateau area?
Oh, I love it. The answer is it's going to be cool climate grapes that you would have, and so you could. And so your Rieslings, Gewürztraminers, and Müller Thurgaus can be there. I don't think it is warm enough to grow Pinot Noir, but you might. The climate's warming, so try Pinot Noir too. So the German style wines, and then Chardonnay, and then Pinot Gris, and then maybe Pinot Noir. So try it. I'll come back up in a couple of years after you plant it and see how it's coming. Yes.
When you stress the grape, are you getting more sugar? Is that what's going on?
What you want to do, you want to get a certain amount of sugar. And so the winemaker will be out in the field in the fall, and they will pick when you get a certain percentage of sugar that you have got. And you don't pick before that time, and you want to get to that at certain sugar content in order to have the alcoholic content be 12, 13, 14%. Is what you want to do. So the vineyard manager and the winemaker go out in the field and pick the grapes. And they actually take some of the grapes back to the lab and figure out the sugar content. But the other thing is they want the grape seeds to go from green color to brown. When you go from green to brown, it means that the grape is ripe. Now, the problem now is that we are getting so hot temperatures that you are getting the sugar contents in mid-June and July that you want to pick at 23, 24% Brix or 23, 24% sugar. But the grape is not ripened. And so they wait until later on, and they're up to 26, 27, 28% sugar, which ends up being 14, 15% sugar alcohol content in the grape juice, in the wine. And if you I look at the alcohol content, and it's everything coming out of California and Eastern Washington and Southern Oregon, those alcohol contents are going up and up and up because you are hang time. They're getting so many heat units out there that they are picking at higher sugar content.
Is the proper alcohol content?
Have a well-balanced wine. You want 12.5% alcohol. 12.5%. And so when you get up to 13, 14%, you're getting it's out of balance. And we're seeing more and more of that just because they need that hang time for the grape seeds to mature. So, yeah. Good. Anything else? Well, I just have a couple things up in front. I've got a paper on soils and wine and terroir. It's one of the most read papers out there, and I got copies of it. If anybody wants to come up, they can get that for free. If anybody wants a copy of my book, Cataclysms on the Columbia, The Great Missoula Floods, John Elliott Allen and Marjorie Burns wrote the first book back in the early 1990s. And then I rewrote the whole thing a few years ago, and it's still the #1 book sold by Hooligan Press at Portland State. And if anybody wants to buy it, they're $25, and all the proceeds from that go to graduate students at Portland State to go to conferences. So if anybody wants a copy of that book, The Missoula Floods, you can. And then if you want a free copy of the wine terroir paper, you can have that. Thanks a lot. So here's the free. Oh, you got to end the meeting, don't you?